Today I get to fly in the B-29 and I get to do it while telling you about B-29s in Alaska. That's right, there were B-29s in Alaska. Were they combat operational? Not so much, but stay tuned, I'll tell you what I mean. But first, if you're new to my channel, then welcome. My name is Karen and I have been retracing my grandfather's wartime footsteps through some of the most remote areas of Alaska, the Aleutian Islands, all in an effort to honor his service and the service of those he served with. If you want to know more about this mysterious and forgotten conflict in one of the most spectacular places on Earth, then stick around. And if you're not new to my channel, then welcome back. Now let's get into it. Initial plans called for the first B-29 raids against the Japanese homeland to be staged from bases in the North Pacific. They had every intention of positioning B-29s out along the Aleutian Island chain, and as early as 1943, approval was given to start the construction of 10,000-foot runways designed specifically to handle the wheel loading of its new long-range bomber. The concrete asphalt runway used bituminous material complete with a fog dispersal unit, Bartow lights, and approach lights. Quite advanced for the chain, and I can't help but imagine how many lives would have been saved with this type of airfield construction in the Aleutians early on. Authorization was given by General Buckner in November of 1943 to complete the entire length of the runway at Shemya. But as the war progressed and we advanced through the Central and South Pacific, it was found that those locations were more suitable bases for operations over the Japanese homelands, not to mention having much more favorable flying weather. Plan for the B-29s in the Aleutians was canceled. But the B-29 did grace the runways of the Aleutians at Shemya when they sent a B-29 from the Cold Weather Detachment Unit at Ladd Field at Fairbanks on a morale mission in May of 1945. On a rare cloudless day, a B-29 cruising at 310 miles per hour with 6 P-38 escorts en route to Shemya, 1,500 miles southwest from Anchorage, squeaked the landing, boastfully using only 5,000 feet of Shemya's 10,000-foot runway. It was quite the sight, and its morale mission was success. The 29 and its crew spent the night, and they flew back the next day. More B-29s would arrive after the war was over. On September 16, 1945, 4 would land on Shemya after a non-stop flight from Iwo Jima. Their mission was to act as a series of rescue planes staged along the route between Hokkaido and Washington, D.C., where an attempt was being made by another group of B-29s to achieve the longest nonstop flight record. That record attempt fell short when the flight was hampered by bad weather and strong headwinds, forcing them to land in Chicago, preventing the bombers from setting that record. Nonetheless, it still went down as the longest flight by any United States Army Air Force. The flight continued on to D.C. the next day, and the 3 pilots, Chris LeMay, Emmett O'Donnell, and Barney Giles, were awarded Distinguished Flying Crosses for their efforts, which essentially pioneered the start of what is now the Great Circle Route. That flight also demonstrated the reach of air power in preparation for the Cold War. In October, another attempt at flying the same distance was planned, and 2 more B-29s landed on Shemya to act once again as sea rescue planes. Aside from Shemya, B-29s were used in Alaska through the 50s to further develop the polar concept, the idea that the shortest, most direct, and least defended route between the U.S. bases and Soviet targets involved flying the Great Circle routes over the Arctic and the North Pole. In 1946, the War Department initiated a top-secret Arctic aerial reconnaissance project named Operation Floodlight. It was led by the newly developed Strategic Air Command, who would then deploy the 46th Reconnaissance Squadron to Ladd Field in Fairbanks as part of Project Nanook, essentially an element of this secret project. They would begin to test the feasibility of transpolar bomber routes and Arctic flying using the F-13As, which is a modified B-29 for aerial photography. The squadron's mission directed the B-29 crews to search for previously undiscovered landmasses, accumulate meteorological data, record magnetic variations, and explore potential Arctic air routes. During their first month of operations in August of 1946, these pioneers flew 30 missions, and they were the first aircrew to fly and mark the North Pole. Of course, flying in the Arctic conditions had its difficulties, which was part of the project. Ultimately, it required the B-29s to undergo roughly 36 modifications to the airplane so that it would be suitable to fly under these extreme polar conditions. Navigationally, the crews also had to overcome the unique challenges of polar navigation, and they did this through the development of grid navigation procedures, a significant advancement in making the polar concept a reality. The crews utilized electric gyro-stabilized compasses that essentially created an artificial north, not dependent on the Earth's magnetic field, which commonly pulled many a World War II pilots off course. The navigators also used celestial navigation to determine true north, another method commonly practiced out of necessity by wartime pilots during the Aleutian campaign. In 1947, with the rise of the Soviet threat and the Cold War, the U.S. needed a better way to assess Soviet military capabilities. So the folks at Wright-Patterson created a modified B-29 that was equipped with specialized radar detection and analysis equipment specifically designed for ferret flights. Ferret flights would be used to gather information on the Soviet radars in Siberia and the Arctic. This modified B-29, known as Elint B-29, or also Sitting Duck, was deployed to Ladd Field on the 21st of May, 1947, where it began its ferret missions. After just 8 missions, though, it was determined that there was no radar coverage along the Siberian coastline, and therefore the airfields were not suitable for imminent bomber operations. Sitting Duck returned home, and eventually Elint ferret missions were transferred over to the 72nd, who continued to operate in Alaska until 1949. B-29s, though, in the form of TB-29s, remained operational in Alaska well into the 50s with the 5040th Radar Evaluation Squadron. And in fact, one of those airplanes still rests on top of an unknown glacier. November 15, 1957, it was on a routine radar calibration training mission, and that mission was to last about 10 hours, and they encountered bad weather in a valley and strayed 27 miles off course, flying into the Talkeetna Mountains. The pilot landed it on the only flat land they saw, a glacier located around 5,600 feet in elevation. Only 4 of the crew members survived. And you can hike to this wreck site. It's called Bomber Glacier. It's a long and somewhat difficult hike, but I do have it on my bucket list.
Don't wanna sleep tonight at all. Just wanna watch them stars fall. But you don't wanna try to make up dreams just to be seen. I wanna lay here beside you, oh quiet. Fire breath and open sky. It's not what we know, it's where we go. I grow wings and tell her goodbye. Oh, it's not what we see, it's what we choose to be. High grass and bare feet. Oh, but you each second is a treat. I keep my balance next to you. It's true. Nowadays there's nothing I wouldn't do for you. Fire breath. It's not what we know, it's where we go. I grow wings and tell worry goodbye. It's not what we see, it's what we choose to be. We're beyond good, I've never been so ready. Fire breath and open sky. It's not what we know, it's where we go. I grow wings and tell worry goodbye. Oh, it's not what we see, it's what we choose to be. Fire breath and open sky. It's not what we know, it's where we go. I grow wings and tell worry goodbye. It's not what we see, it's what we choose to be.
I would like to give an enormous thank you to the dock crew for their hospitality and their willingness to allow me to tell the story of B-29s in Alaska through their beautifully restored aircraft. Now, the story of Doc and its impressive and professional group of dedicated volunteers is deserving of their very own spotlight, so I will be creating a separate video just on them and the tireless dedication they have to the mission of making sure history is not forgotten. Without folks like these who endeavor to keep these flying museums in the air, history would remain dormant and lacking vibrancy. When a warbird comes to life, it provides you with a level of connectedness not achieved by any static museum display. It cannot be measured. It can only be experienced. If you have not gone to visit Doc, what are you waiting for? I will leave a link to their 2024 tour in the description below. And if you have seen it, tell me about it. What did you think? Did you fly in it? Which was your seat? Do you have a family member that served on a B-29? I would like to know. Thank you so much for watching this week's episode. I will see you next week where we will pick up on airplane wrecks with a P-61. See you next week.